when it comes to vision, I think one of the most encouraging things I've ever experienced in ministry is when I hear people in the church articulate the vision back to me. Not like, do you know what the vision is? But in their vernacular, they
Sure.
say things that remind me of things that have been said on stage or things that I've said. So that's like really exciting. But I want to know, have you ever experienced that, like seeing the vision take hold in a surprising or shocking way?
Yeah, I've had a couple times where I opened up, social media, Instagram or Facebook, and saw somebody from the church that had tattooed something that we had been talking about in casting vision around. And I thought, man, I thought this was a compelling thing, but I wasn't even ready to tattoo it on my body. But yeah, that told me like, man, I guess that resonated.
Hey, welcome to the Preaching Through Podcast. The Preaching Through Podcast, this is the conversation that takes place when pastors come together, encourage one another to grow, challenging each other's ability to communicate the gospel. Each episode gives you a seat at the table with ministry leaders exploring how to plan and prepare to preach through topics, books, and subjects that are central to following Jesus in the 21st century America. One of the great paradoxes of ministry that I've discovered over time is that despite being surrounded by people in every facet of work, there are a great number of pastors who are planning, preparing, and preaching in complete isolation. It's not that pastors don't have friends or family that they trust, gathered around them. They do. But the isolation that they're facing is in their own ministry. They're filling multiple positions. They are playing multiple roles, and they feel like they do not have anybody in their life to share the burden of preaching with. So that's what this podcast is all about. My name is Dave Shrine, and I am joined by my co-host, Luke Simmons. And for full disclosure, we both go to the same church, albeit, Luke, you have been at the church a little bit longer than I have. Actually, I wasn't there at the very beginning, but the rumor is at the very beginning you were there. You were actually the one that planted the church.
Yeah, that's a true rumor. Yeah, I lead a church that's called Redemption Church Gateway. We planted it in 2009, so about 13 years ago. And it's been fun because I've been able to kind of see and experience a growing church at a lot of different stages. I mean, I remember when it was very small, I was the only person. I was running copies and printing the bulletins and doing all the stuff all the time, and have seen it grow and develop and go through different phases. I've experienced a merger. We've planted other churches. So there's just been a lot of different things. I actually was calculating. I've preached, I think, about close to 500 sermons at our church. And so...
and that doesn't include things outside of the weekend services.
Yeah, not retreats or camps or anything like that. That's just on Sundays. And we've got a good team of people who preach here as well. But so I've there's a lot I don't know still, but there's, a little bit of water has passed under the bridge. And Dave, you too. I mean, you're not working right now as a vocational pastor, but you've worked as a pastor and a lot of connection and a lot of help with pastors. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So I graduated high school and I went right into like high capacity volunteer in the church.
Huh?
So doing music.
Praise God for high capacity volunteers.
High capacity
Amen.
Volunteers. Yes. And I loved it. I really enjoyed it so much so that when an opportunity to become an intern came around, I jumped at that opportunity. And so I was doing music for college ministry. And so our church was right down the street from ASU. And it was a really unique experience. I don't know what the actual number is, but there's the number thrown around that the average church in the United States is under like 200 people. Well, in the college age ministry, I think we averaged at any point in time between 150 and like 200, 250.
Yeah, well, you figure 60,000 folks coming to Arizona State every year, you're going to be able to pick some of those people off.
And we did.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing season of life for me. And I just fell in love with ministry. I fell in love with ministering to people. Relationships. And so
that's where you and I actually first met.
That's where I actually remember the very first moment we met. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
Yeah.
The lights were shining and it was apparently a pretty magical experience for both of us.
Yeah. And here we are today.
I was, kind of an associate pastor at another church helping out with the college ministry. You were helping out with that ministry and our paths crossed. So it's fun to be doing this now, all these years later.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. Over all of that time, I've just seen the amount of influence that pastors who are dedicated to the to the idea of communicating the gospel, being effective preachers, but also who allow the shepherding side to come out through it. I that's one thing that I've seen in you. That's one thing I've seen in a lot of pastors in my history growing up. And it's one thing that I've grown to value, which is why I'm excited to do this, because I think that shepherding side comes out of conversation and not operating in a silo and understanding what's going on, not just, in the immediate circles that you're in, but with other people. So that's
and Dave, you've been a worship leader. You've preached a little bit, but a lot of your life and work and vocation really is around helping people communicate well.
Yeah.
And so I think you're going to bring a lot with the things you add to this, as well as just the questions you have. So
I sure hope so. That's kind of where I made my mark, was actually in communications. We don't say marketing. We don't say marketing because all of the things that are wrapped up in that. So it's communication ministry. And I had been doing music for such a long time, and I really appreciated the level of impact that I could have.
Sure. When
I took a break from that and I realized the amount of influence and power that the written word had, I realized that was a direction that I felt like I could have an even greater influence on. Yeah. And so doing an event like this, a podcast like this, putting all of these thoughts down and then getting them out, it's really exciting to me. So today's episode, we are talking about what it is to be preaching through a vision series. And we just want to give, you listening, insights that can be helpful, that can be motivating, inspirational, to help you capture what it is you need to communicate to your church through your next vision series, your next vision sermon, or as we'll see in the episode, there's a lot of ways that can manifest itself. So, want to get into it?
Yeah, let's go.
All right.
A few years ago, a new pastor joined our team. He'd been on staff at another church for a number of years, had a lot of experience preaching. And before he preached for the first time at our church, I said, hey, after your sermon, we'll sit down and just debrief it and talk it through. And we did that. And I was able to give him some coaching feedback that just to me felt totally normal. But afterward, he said something that blew my mind. He said, I got more feedback from you after that one sermon than I've gotten all these other years that I've been involved in preaching. Now that stunned me. I grew up in an environment where you got lots of feedback, you got lots of coaching, but I realized that's actually not a common experience for most pastors. Most of us, we only get a little bit of a, hey, pastor, that was pretty good, or we get a nasty email, neither one of which are very helpful. And so I've created an experience where you can have the same kind of experience that he had, getting some tangible feedback as well as some really practical instruction on how to build and craft and deliver great sermons that are consistent week after week. I want to encourage you, I want to help you, and I want to come alongside any way I can. You don't need an overhaul, but a few small tweaks might go a long way to helping you be the preacher God made you to be, helping you find your voice, and helping you to serve the people God's called you to lead. So that's what the Preaching Lab Live is all about. To find out more, go to faithfulandfruitful.com/lab.
I throw up a little bit in my mouth every time I say vision series. I've been in the church, since like 1996. And I think since then I've heard one vision series just about every year until coming to Gateway. And we'll get into maybe why that is in a little bit, but I just heard it so much. But how much does it actually influence? How much does it actually show up outside of the vision series? That's one of the key things that I'm hoping we get into. But before we even talk about the logistics of it, if you're going to preach through a vision series, there are several different groups of people that I imagine you need to keep in mind. Who do you need to keep in mind as you prepare a vision series, vision sermon, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different people. And what I love about, even though I don't do as many vision series, what I love about the idea of preaching vision is my favorite thing about being a pastor and being a preacher is not just preaching God's word. I do love that. I love when the light bulbs come on for somebody. They go, oh, wow, I never saw it that way. But my favorite thing is actually leading people through the preaching. And that's really kind of the heart of what you're trying to do in a vision series or a vision message, or as vision kind of drips through your stuff. And so it's not just kind of about how do I communicate something one time, but how do I actually move people somewhere? And so when I think it through it kind of from that lens, there's a few different groups of people. For one thing, there's you, the preacher, the leader, is, are you moving in the direction of this vision, right? And it has to be something that actually kind of comes from in your bones. Like if you got cut, you would kind of bleed this out, the kind of thing that, if you woke up in 3:00 in the morning and someone was like, "Hey, what's your vision?" You wouldn't go, "I'm not sure." Like it just kind of comes out. And so I think that's something, because people can tell whether the person communicating it believes it. And they might even go, "I don't know if I am all in on that, but I can tell he is."
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's kind of the first piece. The second piece is like the stakeholders. Like there's all these people that, maybe you call them your core, maybe it's your high capacity volunteers. Maybe it's staff, maybe it's elders, maybe it's deacons, maybe it's a board, maybe it's just like these kind of core people that like, hey, this church isn't going to move forward really without them. They're buying. So that's it. And then another layer, I guess, would be just kind of your average attender. The kind of person who maybe they're kind of on the periphery, maybe they're a pretty regular attender, but they haven't quite moved into that core. They're not really owning ministry or discipleship or the vision that you have, and you're trying to kind of bring them on. And then maybe a last category would be guests. I mean, I just think anytime we're preaching, we always want to have guests in mind. And I think some of what happens, if you're thinking, okay, sometime you preach a vision message or a vision series, there's guests. This is their first time there. They don't know anything about this church, but what they experience in that moment is going to hopefully tell them something that makes them go, I'm interested in this. I might like to come back. So I think all of those different groups are pretty important.
So if we were going to break down those groups, I would like to start with and hear your thoughts on what do you, the pastor, need to keep in mind? What's essential for you to have on the forefront of your brain as you're thinking through casting this vision, preaching this vision?
Yeah, like in terms of for me as the leader, like what has to be true there for me. I think it's like there's a lot of different really cool visions I've heard people talk about, different approaches and dreams for ministry that I've gone, man, that is really cool, but that ain't me. That's awesome, great, but that doesn't. And so I think one of the temptations for a pastor is to think of something or hear something or kind of echo back something someone else has said. And you go like, oh, right. Man, like that sounds, like we want to create a church unchurched people love to attend. Like, man, I love that. But like, is that really core to who you are? Like we want to help people, know, grow and go. You're like, okay, great. Is that it? So I think it's just easy to kind of go, ooh, that sounded good. And one step is to go, is this really in me? Like, because it's going to be hard to lead people with authenticity if it doesn't really come from kind of deep in your bones. And so I think that's a key thing to look at.
I got the opportunity to go through a entire vision casting process at one of the churches that I worked in the past, and it was a transformational experience. Like it shaped me not just as a ministry leader, but also as a communicator in general, and as well as just a person. I mean, that experience shaped my life moving forward. One of the things that I learned, you said this, like, is it in me or am I just adopting from someone else? The level of words that we went through trying to understand and capture a vision that was unique to our church and to our context, I can't begin to tell you how many words we started sorting through and just wrestling over and talking about and, vetoing and affirming. And it was one of these deals, like if we had never gone through the process of hearing those words come out of our mouth, we would have never been able to identify some of the unique words, and it would have just been us adopting other things. But the fact that we were very intentional about the words we chose to use in our official, mission, values, and measures, that made it so we did bleed it. But that was an exercise that took place. I think it was unnecessarily over 12 months. I think we could have done it in a lot shorter time, but it was a 12-month process that we went through. And like I said, it completely transformed me. So I like that point. Like, is it in you?
Well, and one of the things that we do in a process like that is usually people just add words.
Yeah.
Comma, 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 comma. And now it's 100 sentences long and no one remembers it.
Yeah.
And it's like, I guess. And what it is it's kind of this like, people say that a camel is a, horse made by a committee, like, and you don't want a vision in that sense made by a committee.
Yeah.
I think, it's not, you're also not Moses. You don't go up to the mountain and just come down with God's word for everybody. But there is a sense in which, I think a vision has to start in the heart of a leader. And then you bring that to the group of trusted, whether that's a board or staff or whoever, and you help refine it and you figure out, okay, what's resonant here, not just with me, but with us. But if it doesn't kind of burn a little bit in the heart of the leader, then he's going to be kind of putting Saul's armor on and clunking around like David did, and eventually go, this isn't working for me. And I think that's some of what happens sometimes. I think pastors who are really just desperate to see God do something, and we want to go somewhere, and you go to a conference or you hear a podcast like this, and somebody that seems really smart and experienced is saying, well, here's what we did, and you kind of copy paste. And I think that's just can be dangerous. I mean, what it ends up doing is you go, okay, next year, what's it going to be?
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of times, I can tell pastor went to a conference because here's the new thing. And whereas I think when it comes more from deep within, there's a sense in which you can go, okay, I can keep repeating this year after year and keep getting excited about it.
The distinction that you made there, it's not like Moses coming down from Mount Sinai with the vision, but it has to start and burn inside of you. I think that's a key distinction to make, because one of the things that made the mission, values and measures so impactful in the situation I just referenced was the fact that it was a collaborative effort with a very small group of church leadership. But then the rolling out of that happened in several phases over the course of several months, getting more and more buy-in from key stakeholders. And then finally, at the very end, maybe people who, show up half of the Sundays a year or are visitors, they heard it, but everybody else was on board. So the next group of people that I want to ask you about is the stakeholders. What do I need to keep in mind as it relates to bringing my stakeholders into the circle and not just being this Moses moment and that's it?
Well, what we're getting into a little bit actually is kind of a whole vision leadership process, right? That's kind of bigger than probably the scope of what we're trying to do exactly on this podcast, just talking about the preaching side. But your point is really smart, where it's like, if you're rolling out the vision series and your stakeholders are hearing it for the first time, like you miss some steps, right? So there is that process of buy-in. It depends what it is. It depends if it's like, hey, here's the kind of overarching vision for our church versus like, here's the kind of rallying cry short season or an initiative or a building project or an evangelism campaign or, something you're like, so, if it's like the overarching vision, this is why sometimes I think it's helpful to do a vision series or do a vision message, but mostly I just want the overall vision to just drip through our church. And just be coming out, not like, oh, here's the 4 weeks we did it, or here's the 1 week we did it, but here's the 52 weeks we did it, and it's kind of connected to everything. Now, if you're talking about more of an initiative, I've led through a number of different building initiatives, and, that's a different thing. And I think it's bringing those core people in, saying, hey, what resonates with you? What connects with you? Giving them time to process it, giving them kind of an invitation to pray through it. I think one of the best ways actually to find out that your core people are bought into the vision is to hear them pray. Because if you can actually hear them pray, you can hear like, oh, are they praying kind of in their own words to the Lord? Are they communicating the vision? And so those are some things that I think of. And ultimately, they really are going to be the ones carrying it, and so
they'll need to explain it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because a lot of times people are going to go, I don't know what I think about that. And they're not going to come to the pastor. They're going to come to their small group leader, or they're going to come to the buddy that they serve with on the tech team, or the person that they connect with in kids ministry and go, what do you think about that? And that's where, having those kind of key stakeholders, the people who have just influence, whether they have a position or not, having them kind of understand it and be able to go, oh yeah, here's why I'm in, I think testimonies is a key thing as well. Like, especially when you're doing initiatives, giving, as part of your preaching, as part of your communication, giving the microphone sometimes to someone else to go, hey, why do you believe in this? And I think that can be powerful.
So the ability to explain it is essential, because there are going to be, that situation is going to come up. I don't know what I think about this. One of the churches that I was a part at, the pastor had a big vision saying, and it was painted on the walls of the church when people walked in.
Yeah.
It's a safe place to visit, a dangerous place to stay. And danger, churches are not supposed to be dangerous.
Someone just wrote that down, and that became their church vision.
And that became their church vision.
I want to tell them, like, hey, sit on it a minute. But that is pretty good.
Let it simmer.
Yeah.
Is it you?
Sorry,
Because
I interrupted you.
no, but people are going to have to explain it. And if you can't articulate it clearly and what that means, good grief, nobody else is going to be able to do that. If you can't call it up on a moment's notice and give an argument for why that's compelling, nobody else is going to be able to. And so, safe place to visit, dangerous place to stay really is kind of a head tilter, and it requires some additional context, especially in a day and age where the church is kind of under a microscope in terms of, well, I want to make religion work for me. I don't want to go to a church that's dangerous. Well, hold on. Here's why you may want to rethink that. So you've got your,
Well, and what you just, like, that example is a good example because it makes you pause. You go, I got to think about that for a second.
Yeah.
Like, not because you're like, I don't get it, but like, that head tilt moment, like the dog that goes, and I think if the vision doesn't do some of that, it's like too bland.
Yeah.
Right. And it probably isn't capturing your heart or anyone else's, but.
So you've got the work that you're doing on yourself and the things that are stirring up inside of you, trying to capture that. As you capture it, you put it in front of other people, and it's not vision designed by committee, but it's this idea of finding what resonates. It's this idea of, really drilling down and identifying how you're going to articulate this vision and what it means and how you're going to give an account for it, and are other people capturing it? And so then once you've got that, what are some key considerations for when you finally do, and you've touched on this a little bit, but you finally do roll that out? I heard you say rally cries. And so, what did you mean by that? Do you just release a slogan or?
Yeah. So the language of rallying cry comes from Patrick Lencioni, who wrote The Advantage and a number of other like really good, just small little organizational leadership books. He has a great team he leads called the Table Group. They've got some podcasts and other stuff that I think is worth looking into. But he talks about a rallying cry being kind of like a 3 to 6 month, what's most important for our organization right now, right? And so maybe as a church, like that's where I would go, like your big picture vision shouldn't be changing every 6 months. Like that's like just herky jerky for people. But you might go, hey, here's what we're focusing on. A lot of times I even think like you don't always have to be explicit with that. Like you shouldn't be doing here's our 6 month rallying cry series, like that's probably too much. But that's where that language comes from. It's kind of that idea of going, okay, if the North Star is our vision, what do we have to focus on right now to help us get another step closer to that? And so, but I think at the point that you're communicating it, I mean, it is interesting, just even the language of vision is visual, right? And so it's a bit of this, like you're trying to paint a picture, right? You're trying to kind of not just describe it, but show it. And that's hard to do because you're using words, and it's easier to describe stuff with words than it is to show stuff with words. But I think that's a lot of what you're trying to do is bring people into an experience, into an emotional experience, not just kind of emotionalism and let's just hype them up, but they do have to have something that like at a heart level goes, oh yeah, like I'm interested in that. And so that's where I think word pictures are helpful. I think analogies and stories and illustrations, and especially the stories, like here's how we're already seeing this. I think the best visions are things that are like, here's things we've already tasted a little bit. And now let's talk about what if we tasted this a lot more? Like, what if this thing that happened, that's a real thing, it's not imaginative, but we want to see this little kernel of goodness like blossom into something spectacular.
One of the best ways that, as a communicator, one of the best ways that I challenge any of the copy that I'm writing, any of the words that I'm putting together, descriptions, what have you, is can I see the end result of what it is I'm calling people to? And so often, like, let's just take, the stereotypical, like, hey, drop your kids off on Wednesday night. There's going to be pizza and games. It's going to be awesome. And it's like, okay, I can do pizza and games pretty much anywhere. How do I paint a picture for a parent to then see exactly what's going to be happening? You might throw in some language of one-on-one conversations with adults that you would trust your kids with. And all of a sudden they know what that looks like, a one-on-one conversation. They can see that. Your students sitting in a small group with 5 other peers talking about decisions that matter in their lives today and in the future. and they can see what it looks like to sit down in a circle. But it takes intentionality and time to bring that vision to life with these visual pictures. And I think it's something that you've had some success doing. I was sitting in one of your sermons over the last, 2 or 3 months, and you started talking about just a taste, just giving people a taste of what it is to know and follow Jesus. And I kind of leaned over to my wife and I like poked her on. I was like, he's going to talk about the pink spoon people now. And you didn't talk about the pink spoon people, but I knew exactly what you were talking about because early on in attending Gateway, you started talking about the pink spoon people. You don't have to go into great detail, but what is the pink spoon people? Because that was an effective illustration.
Well, this is one of the things when I saw someone got a pink spoon tattooed on their arm, and I was like, "Oh wow!" Like this landed.
Well done.
It's simply the picture of we believe as followers of Jesus that part of our role as the church is to give people a preview of the coming kingdom of God. Right? We're always praying, "God, let your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven." And at some point, we're going to get the full taste of it, right? Mm-hmm. Jesus is going to return. He's going to make all things new, wipe away every tear. That's going to be amazing. Until then, we get to be a preview of it. And so you could describe that by saying, hey, we're going to, we need to be a sign and an agent of the kingdom, something like that. But we've landed on this language. We didn't invent this. I think we got it originally from Amy Sherman, but this idea of the pink spoon people, when you go to Baskin Robbins, and you sample the ice cream, they get a little pink spoon, and they give you a real taste of the real thing, right? If you get the full cone, it comes out of the same container, but here's a little taste of it. And so we're saying, okay, we're a pink spoon people. We're drawing on the reality of heaven, and we're drawing on the reality of life with Christ, and we're giving people, here's a little taste of what you could have if you came into this kingdom, if you trusted the Lord. And so we do that with love and good works and with sharing the gospel and all those things. But there is something about even just an illustration like that, a story like that, no one's going to tattoo sign an agent of the kingdom on their arm, but they did tattoo a pink spoon. Yeah. And it's fun in that case too, because it's a real conversation starter.
Absolutely.
Hey, what's the deal with that? Why would you get that tattoo on your arm? What does that mean?
Yeah.
And they're able to go, well, here's the thing. I believe that, the kingdom of God is amazing, and off they go. And so, being able to help people actually get a picture of it is pretty significant. I think about, one of the most effective ads to me over the last few years that I saw on TV, and I wish now I could remember the company, so maybe it wasn't that effective. But it was like a financial advisor company. And I feel like a lot of financial advisor companies, someone's walking into an office, or there's a graph, or there's a this, or there's a that. Well, this one is, the dad's out mowing the grass and it's hot, and his daughter's like, I want to go to Jessica's house. And like nobody in the family's happy. And he realizes like, you know what, like the future is now. And he works with his financial advisors to come up with how to get money to put a pool in the yard. And now instead of his family being grumpy and unhappy, there they are. They're all swimming in the pool and they're enjoying it. And to me, like, well, that's a compelling vision.
Yeah.
It's like, this isn't about how do we make your graph get bigger, but it's like, because why do you want your financial house to be in order? So that you can have great experiences with your family, right? So anyway, I just think that like that's an ad that didn't just think, how do we communicate what's true, but how do we cast a vision for something that's compelling?
So there are several different reasons why you might want to do a vision series. We've talked a lot about rolling out maybe a mission, an updated mission, rolling out the articulation of some values or measures, how we do things and how we know if we're going to be successful. So there's different types of vision series, but whatever vision series you do, whatever vision messages you give, however the vision leaks, you ultimately want to be calling people to something. You want to give them an ask. Okay, I'm on board with this. At one of my past churches, it was, I'm on board. So now what?
Yeah.
So what do I do now? And so it's essential to have some sort of a call to action.
Yeah.
What should I do for that?
Yeah. Well, this is where, you really do need to think through it, not just for a sermon or for a series, but the whole leadership thing. So yeah, I think you just sort of imagine if someone says, I'm in, what do I do now? So now what?
Yeah.
You create next steps, and maybe that's through, connection cards. And hey, if you want to dive into this, mark this thing on the connection card, or come to the back and talk to me, or we're going to have this follow-up meeting about this, or here's this way to get involved or serve. So it really is kind of thinking through what are the next steps so that people can do this. Another thing to think about is the tools, right? Someone goes, man, I want to be a pink spoon person. How do I do that? Well, maybe you need some tools on how to live in such a way that makes people go, oh, what was that? Maybe you need tools on how to have a conversation. Oh, you want to be a pink spoon person? Well, we're going to do a sharing your faith 101, class, and off you go. So I think thinking through those next steps, because it is frustrating if people resonate with it. They go, oh man, I love this, but now I don't know what to do.
Right.
And they're going to feel like, man, I wanted to buy it, and you hit the buy now button from me. Like, how do I? Yeah. So I think thinking through those next steps, that's probably as much leadership moves as preaching.
There's a lot more to say about this, which
Sure.
if you would like to hear from us, this podcast is sponsored by Ministry Pass. And so if you want to hear from us, if you've got follow-up questions, you can just email support@ministrypass.com. And they will get those questions to us, and we can follow up with you. So there's so much more that we could say. The thing that I want to end with is asking you, measuring whether or not the vision is landing. Obviously, you get a tattoo, that vision landed. I guess
Sure.
that's a measure of success. And albeit not the one you're going to put in front of everyone. We're all going to go get tattoos together.
Sure.
But we've got the vision. We're preaching the vision series. We're keeping it fresh by leaking it constantly, by referencing a rally cry and having that for a season. How do I measure whether or not this is actually moving forward? Because I would imagine, and I'll let you take over in a second. I would imagine that there are seasons when you have felt this. There's seasons where I've felt it in my own little pocket of ministry. And I've heard it from other pastors that it's almost like Jesus said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. But sometimes it feels like you are moving that thing all by yourself. And if my people would just, how can you measure whether it's effective?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard. I feel like a lot of what preaching is there's this raging forest fire. I mean, here in Arizona where we are, there's unfortunately just these huge forest fires every year. And I feel like there's this forest fire raging of cultural idolatry that's out there, and it's in our hearts, and it's everywhere. And I get this little squirt gun. And it's not like even a super soaker. It's like a, single shot little squirt gun, and, pew, pew, pew. And like most of the water evaporates from the heat of the fire before it even like goes, psst, And so I think that is what it feels like to be a preacher. And so here we are casting this vision with our little squirt gun. And that's why I kind of go 4 weeks of it, 30 minutes of a one-time thing like that. And I feel like dripping it through the whole year barely moves the needle. Right. So, and just accepting, like, until the Lord returns, it's never going to be a reality across the board, right? So, but what you're really asking is like, how do you measure that it's taking root, right? What are some indications? So you kind of referenced one. One is when people are saying it themselves, right? Whether that's through their prayers or leaning over their spouse during the sermon or whatever. One that's kind of fun is when people make fun of it back to me.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're supposed to be pink spoon people. Like, rather than getting upset about that, I'm like going, yes, if they know it well enough to mock it, that it's actually gaining traction. Right. And it's at least factoring in, like, maybe, so I think that's it. And then I think it's trying to really see through stories, to go, oh, here's an example. Here's a place. And that's where it's a lot. One of the best ways I'm glad we ended here, is one of the best ways to cast vision is to tell stories of the vision and to celebrate it, right? Because that communicates culturally. Hey, here's what we get excited about. Here's what lights us up. And so, like, I love telling a story about, hey, here's this person that really invested in their neighbor, and they, cared about him and loved him through this difficult time, and they invited him to church, and the person said no. They didn't come to church. And you know what? We're going to celebrate that, because that person was a pink spoon person, even though no one ended up at the church, even though no one, there's no huge bow at the end of that story. But you can celebrate those things. And so I think it's looking for these little pockets of life change, pockets where it's happening, where the flame is catching. And then it's trying to fan those into flame and tell those stories and celebrate that. And that's where I think you also have to, at some point, then maybe go, you know what, that's not happening. And that makes you then have to go, okay, well, what is it about either the way this is burning in me, or the work I need to do to rally people in that core kind of to buy in on this. Where do I have to go back to the drawing board and maybe figure out different new ways to articulate it? But I think you are looking for those incremental things, whether it's in the comments people make or the stories you see. And sometimes I think you have to ask other people, ask small group leaders, hey, where are you seeing this?
Mm-hmm.
And just that's actually another way of casting vision, is asking people to look for the vision, and where they see it, they start to go, oh, wow, that's really cool.
I really appreciate you ending with that concept of bringing other people into it and asking them to look for it. One of the most formative moments of my entire ministry life was when I was invited into the room with the pastor and several other key leaders. And the pastor goes, this is what we're going to be preaching on. Let's just talk about it. And for the next 90 minutes, I remember everything about that. For the next 90 minutes, we just discussed God's word.
Yep.
We discussed the culture. And not only did I feel like I had a part in contributing, and not only did it feel pretty good to, hey, the
big guy asked me in the meeting.
And he used that in his message. So
that is fun.
That is very, very fun. But it's also just a great exercise in challenging your brain with the thoughts and feelings and insights from other people. Nobody ever taught me how to preach. So pastor comes in one day, hey, I need you to preach this passage in Revelation,
In Revelation? Oh my goodness.
Fortunately.
Come on, man. Give me John 3:16 or something. I need you to preach in Revelation. At least he didn't ask for Ezekiel or something. Good night.
Yeah, no joke. So I just went to a coffee shop. I hunkered down and I just started writing things. And I wish so badly that I would have been able to have you, several other people that we commonly know together and some other trusted people to sit down and dialogue through that process of how am I going to communicate the truth of this text to the entire church? Because at that point I was just limited to the knowledge that I had. But this Preaching Through podcast is really something that matters a lot to me. And I'm excited not only that we've had just a fantastic conversation of how to communicate that vision, but that's a little bit of the vision that we have for this podcast is that pastors, as they do this and other subjects, they'll be able to sit down and not feel like, all right, I'm just going to start writing stuff. But honestly, be challenged to think a little bit differently.
Well, one of the pictures that hangs in my office, my wife asked my daughter to draw it, and it's this beautiful desert scene. And if you look closely, you see this turtle on a fence post. And she asked my daughter to draw it because it's this symbol that we talk about a lot, that, when I think about my life and my ministry, I feel like a turtle on a fence post. You look at it and you go, that didn't get out there by itself. Someone put it there. And so that is a lot of our hope, is I feel like I've had the blessing of different people investing in me, helping me, lifting me up on the fence post. And so anyone who's listening, that's kind of our desire, is just that we'd be hopefully a voice that helps get you a little further up the fence post. And, hopefully it serves some people.
I want to thank you for listening to this first episode of the Preaching Through podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen, and please rate and review the program on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Why is that important? Because if this has been helpful for you, the only way other pastors, other laborers in ministry, the only way that they're going to find it is if you share it with them. And one of the ways we can share with people who we don't know is by helping those algorithms put it in front of them. So please do go to Apple Podcasts, search for the Preaching Through podcast on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Some of the next episodes that we have coming up, Luke, preaching through an election season. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Doesn't it feel like it's always election season?
Now it does, yeah. Preaching through tough texts, which was something that you had come up with that I thought was a great topic. Preaching through the Gospels, other interesting topics or scenarios that pastors are going to find themselves encountering.
I can't wait.
Yeah, it's going to be good. So, hey, thanks so much for hanging out with me a little bit. And thank you so much for listening. We'll be back soon.